Do you maybe want to send me the link so I can open it on my side? Is it a was to a slide?
It's a Keynote thing. I've got it in Keynote. So I'm just gonna go through this, and that's fine because I can actually, it looked nice, but it's just gonna be what it is. It is what it is. Okay, so first of all, I want to welcome everybody, and sorry for the technical problems. I thought I had this all wired together, and clearly I didn't. This is transforming the world by evolving your emotional and spiritual life. Now, when I thought about this, the first time I went through this material and tried to figure out how long it was going to take to present it, I thought, okay, I want to kind of keep this an hour and a half at the most. And I went through, and it was like an hour and 40 minutes without even questions. And then I realized that there were things that I really needed to talk about that I hadn't even mentioned. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? What am I going to cut out? And so I started looking at what I was going to cut out, and what occurred to me, I had this voice run through my head, which was, it was a voice of Jeff Walker, if anybody knows who that is. He's kind of a multi-millionaire entrepreneur who developed product launch formula. And I remember, and I know Jeff, and one of the things that I heard his voice say is, you can't ever make content too long. You can only make it too boring. Don't put in things that you don't need to be there, but make it not boring, and people will stay. And so I thought, okay, I want to make things non-boring. What can I do to make things non-boring? And I realized that the thing that we're all most interested in is ourselves. And so what I really want you to understand before we even start, I want you to understand that I've designed this webinar to be about you. It's about, it's about you. Now, it's not all going to seem that way. I think some of it is going to seem weird and dry, and some of it, a lot of it, especially the first part of it, is going to seem like I'm talking a lot about myself and my personal story. But really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to frame what the issue is, frame what the issues are, and sort of how the issues all feed into the central theme of what we're going to be talking about. So that's kind of my promise before we get started. Okay, let me see. Okay, so where I want to start is with 3 big ideas. And I posted this in a few places, and so you may have seen this, but I want to just start here because these are really the 3 ideas that are behind why I decided to do this masterclass right now and where I think we're going with this. And the first big idea is that it's up to us to fix this. And by this, I mean all of it. Before this pandemic started even, there were a lot of problems that we all saw in the world, whether it was the way people were treated, with the way women were treated, the way immigrants were treated, the way ethnic groups were treated, the way foreigners were treated in different countries. There were problems, and we really needed to do something about that. There were also environmental problems. There were problems with the education system. There were problems with the healthcare system. And that's worldwide. And as we've seen with what's going on with the pandemic that's going on right now, those things have become more obvious as we've gotten people off the streets and kept them in their homes. The environment has made a comeback. And at the same time, the healthcare system worldwide has been taxed, and the education system worldwide has been taxed. The ability of people to have productive work and do things that create good for other people has been taxed. It's been taxed past the breaking point in some cases. And all indications are we're heading for a recession, and the great probability, the biggest probability is that it's going to be bigger than anything we've seen since the Great Depression in the 1930s. I've seen that there are even models that show that it's going to be bigger, more severe, not necessarily longer lasting, but more severe, and that more people are going to be affected. If we wait for the government to fix that, if we wait for somebody else to fix that, it's not going to happen. We're going to have to fix that. It's up to us. We're going to have to fix all of it. And we're in a position to fix all of that, actually. But the second thing is that whatever change we want to make in the world, outer manifestation always follows inner transformation. We have to change ourselves before we have any chance to change the world. There is no possible way to change the world unless we do something with ourselves. And that leads to the third one, which is that we're each here for a specific reason. There's some reason that we are alive now. There's something that we are meant to add right now. And it's up to each of us to find it and fulfill it. That's how we will do our part to fix the world, to create the manifestation in the world that we want to see, and how we'll fix the problem. But first, we have to do the inner work to find out who we are. So those are the way the 3 points fit together. So where we're going to start and end this is on finding our big why. And where that started with me was not knowing my own big why. Now, this isn't going to be one of those webinars, I'm just going to say, where people, they tell you for 10 minutes how great they are, and I was in your place, and that's bullshit. We're not doing that. But I am going to talk about myself here, and mostly to frame the issues that I think are important, because I think as you see how this fits together through my eyes and through my experience, it'll make sense. So I tried to figure out where the best place to start in this was to talk about myself. And I realized that the place to actually start was on the first day of second grade at Fort Buckner Elementary School in Fort Buckner, Okinawa. Now, I'd gone to first grade there too, but on the first day of second grade, the teacher handed out these tests, these math tests, and she said it was to see what people remembered from the year before, because people forget over the summer. Well, that seemed weird to me, that people would forget things that they learned the year before, especially with like addition and subtraction, because that didn't seem like something you'd forget. So that was the first day of second grade. The second day of second grade, I walked into class, and the teacher told me that from then on, every time it became math time, I was supposed to leave the room and walk down to another room where I was going to meet with a different teacher with a different bunch of kids, and she was going to teach me math. And I asked why, and it's like, because you're better at math than everybody else in this class is, and so they got the people in class that are better at math to be in this class. Okay, fine, whatever. Well, it turns out instead of being in a second grade math book, they started us off in a third grade math book. And by the middle of the year, we were in a fourth grade math book. And so while most of the kids were kind of learning their addition and subtraction tables, by the end of the year, we were multiplying like 3 digits by 3 digits and dividing 4 digits by 2 and 3 digits and getting remainders and fractional remainders, stuff like that. We were pretty far ahead of what the rest of the second grade was doing in math. Well, I didn't think much about that. It's like, well, there's kids in that class who were better at math than I was. So I thought I was just kind of dumb for that class. I didn't really think much about it. Now, third grade, we moved from the base. We moved back to the States. I was in a civilian school. And so in third grade, I took third grade math again, which I already knew. It's kind of boring. Fourth grade, took fourth grade math. I'd already taken fourth grade math. It was kind of boring. First week of fifth grade, the teacher is teaching fifth grade math, and she gives us math to do. We're working math. And she gives us like an hour to finish the assignment. And I remember after 10 minutes, she asked me what I was doing. Why wasn't I working on math work? And I said, because I'd already finished it. And so she said, well, let me see it. And so I showed it to her, and I'd done it all. All the problems were correct. And she said, well, here, just sit there. Do you have a library book? No. Well, just sit there quietly and don't disturb anybody. Well, I probably, as other people finished, I probably started talking to them and trying not to disturb anybody, but I'm sure that became something. And so the second day of math class, same kind of thing happened, except this time when I finished after 10 minutes, she said, come up here and turn your paper in. So I came up and turned my paper in, and she looked at it, and they were all correct. And so she handed me a piece of paper, and it's like, this is a hall pass to the library. I've talked to the librarians. Go down there and you can do anything you want to. Just go down to the library and then come back when it's time for the next class, which is smart. I mean, it kept me from disturbing the rest of the class, I suppose. But so I went down to the library. Well, what do you do when you're in the library and you're the only kid in the library? Well, it's a big room full of books. So I started looking at books, and I didn't really read much. I was good at math, but I was not a very good reader at that point. It's probably average. But okay, so I started reading books. I started looking at stuff in the books. Well, then I found something that was interesting, and I asked the librarian, can I take this? Oh, yeah. So she checked it out to me. I took it back to class with me, and I would read it when I was bored, kind of during breaks in class, and I got into it during the day, so I took it home. This became a pattern, like every day. So by the end of the fifth grade, instead of being like average at reading, I'm now like the best reader in the class too. I'm like way ahead of everybody in math and reading. My point about this is not like, okay, I'm so brilliant. My point in this is that, first of all, thank goodness for the teachers who kept me sort of on track and challenged me and kept me from being bored. But what it really kind of gets down to is that from the teacher's point of view, I was way ahead in math. I was way ahead in reading. I could do anything. I could be anything I wanted to be. What did I want to do? And that was my weakness. It's like I could do math. I was really good at math, and I was really good at learning new concepts in math, but doing problems that I already knew how to do just to show that I knew how to do them was boring. That was terrible. There's no way I wanted to do that. Reading, I could read, but reading all the time, reading boring stuff all the time, stuff I didn't care about, that was pretty awful too. I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't know what I did want. Now, that doesn't matter when you're in second grade. It doesn't matter when you're in fifth grade. It doesn't matter too much when you're in ninth grade. By the time you get to like 11th and 12th grade and you're looking at making applications to the university, that starts to become a problem. I had no idea what I wanted to do, which meant I had no idea what I wanted to major in, which meant I had no idea where I wanted to go and study. And so what I realized about that was, first of all, start with something that I could transfer out of and couldn't transfer into, which in this case meant engineering. I could do that. Also, it paid to go to a school where there were a lot of different majors, so that if I didn't know what I wanted to do, I could at least bounce around and find eventually something that I did want to do. So I went to the University of Texas, which had good programs in practically everything. And I tell people affectionately that I graduated from school on the 5 different majors in 5 years plan. I started in engineering. I made a brief detour through business in the middle and ended up with a degree in economics. And the reason that I ended up with a degree in economics was actually because I was sitting in my second economics class, which was sort of expected to take as part of a business major, sitting in a microeconomics class with a full professor who kind of was like a more arrogant version of the history teacher from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if you've ever seen that movie. He kind of droned on, but he had this arrogance about him. And so everybody was bored to death and scared of him. And so nobody would ask him a question. Nobody even acted interested. And I remember one day he made the announcement that in economics, we always assume that all decisions are made rationally. And to me, that was nuts. I mean, I couldn't even figure out what I wanted to do with my life. How in the world was I making a rational decision about that? But as far as he was concerned, all decisions were made rationally. And so I raised my hand. The only time anybody ever raised their hand in this class the entire year. And I asked him if he really believed that, or if that was just economic theory that he was trying to teach us. And he gave this very roundabout, harumphing kind of answer, and finally came to the conclusion that nobody understood irrational thinking anyway. It was impossible to model irrational thinking because nobody knew anything about irrational thinking. And so it was just easier to assume everything was rational. And as he was saying that nobody knew anything about irrational thinking, the thought went through my head, are you telling me that no economist has ever heard of Sigmund Freud? Which seemed weird to me. But at that point, I realized 3 things by the time I left class that day. One was that was one of the worst answers I'd ever heard. The second one is that guy was a full professor. And number 3 is I had to be able to do better than that. And so since I was at that point, about to hit the end of my third year and realized that I wasn't going to be in business either and was going to have to declare myself an undecided major, which was kind of a bad position to be in going into your fourth year in university. I decided that my major was going to be economics because I had to be able to do better than that. So that's why I graduated with a degree in economics. But the point in all of that is, as I thought about it and as I was considering it, I had been trying to figure out, I didn't understand my big why, but I couldn't even figure out how anybody was supposed to understand their big why. And so I tried to see how other people figured out what they wanted to do with their lives. And I realized that there were 4 categories of people in the world. They fell into 4 groups. So the first group I call the self-saboteurs. The self-saboteurs were the people who would say things like, I've always wanted to be an accountant, but then they would forget to set their alarm clock to get up for early morning accounting class. Or I've always wanted to be a doctor, but then they would decide they didn't like the guy who taught organic chemistry, and so they just would blow off the class. And since that was the one thing you really had to do as a pre-med major to make it to med school, that kind of sealed their fate. The second group was a group I called the disciplined, and the disciplined group always, well, they made their decisions rather quickly and without consideration about what they were going to do. They make these big decisions about what they're going to do, and it seemed like without giving it any thought. But then once they made the decision, they were very disciplined about making sure they did it. They'd get to the end goal. But what I've noticed over time, and because these were people that I knew and I've kind of followed them over time, is that although they were very disciplined about reaching their goal, that's not what they ended up doing. So I have several examples, but the 2 I want to give you that sort of my match set. One is my sister. My sister has a degree in English literature. It's all she ever wanted to do was study English literature. That's the only degree she has, but she ended up as taking some night classes or something and becoming over time a senior partner in an accounting firm. No degree in accounting. On the other hand, I've got the guy who I shared an apartment with at the university. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in accounting, and last time I knew, he was teaching English in China. So both of them knew exactly what they wanted to do, but that's not what they ended up doing. That's kind of what the disciplined group did. The third group were the obsessive compulsives. And even at age 20, I knew there was something seriously wrong with this group. They always, the thing they had in common, they always picked something outside themselves. This is what I want. I want money. I want power. I want prestige. I want control. I want better toys than anybody else. I want the corner office. The reason I called them the obsessive compulsives is that whatever it was that they wanted, they could never get enough of it. They could never get enough money, power, prestige. Their toys were never nice enough. And no matter how good they had it or how much they had or how much they'd been able to do, they were never happy. And so it was just this compulsive hamster wheel kind of existence, which I knew was kind of messed up. And then the fourth group were the clueless. And I was one of the clueless. The clueless were the people who didn't have any idea what they wanted to do. And so they were kind of stuck. All right. I am going to unmute everybody for a second. Are we all good? Is everybody staying with me?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
No.
Okay. All right. Good. Then we will get back to it again. And I'm sorry y'all can't see my beautiful slides, although they're not all that beautiful. Y'all would laugh if you actually saw what I'm rocking for slides. But I am going to mute y'all a second and get going again. All right. So I graduated from the university, and this led me to, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. But I'd realized that I had this idea. The one thing I knew is I can do better than that guy. I can do better than that guy. And so I thought, if I'm going to study irrationality, this is a good economic decision, right? How do people know what they want to do with their lives? And so I decided to make a study out of this. I had my 4 groups already, but as I went around, I started talking to psychologists about how I could study this, and they all said, well, there's no way you can study this as an undergrad. There's no way to even look at this. You have to go to grad school. You'd have to get a graduate degree in clinical psychology, but you still wouldn't know that. You're better off just getting practical experience. Just get yourself around people who are making irrational decisions like you're talking about and figure out what you're going to do. So it's like, well, shoot, how do I do that? Well, at the time, luckily for me, I had 5 friends who each worked at a different long-term residential treatment center. And they would all sit around talking to each other at night about how things were at the different places. And one of them consistently had more to say and was talk about the training he got. And I thought, okay, that sounds like the place to work. I can get some training there. I can actually be exposed to people, because I know obsessive compulsive. I don't know much psychology, but I know obsessive compulsive sounds pretty psychological. And I know self-sabotaging sounds pretty psychological. I'm not sure about wandering around lost or being sure that you know what you're doing and being wrong. That sounds psychological, but at least they kind of end up in the right place. So maybe that's not quite the thing I want to deal with, but maybe there's some of that too. So this is what I want to do. I'm going to go off and I'm going to find a place. I'm going to work with these people and I'm going to study how these people think. I may not be able to figure out what I want to do. I may not be able to figure out how anybody else knows what they want to do, but I can at least look at all the things that people try and what doesn't work. So that's what I wanted to do. So I took this job at a long-term residential treatment center. Now, the thing about long-term residential treatment centers, I have to explain just briefly, these places really don't exist anymore. The way they were set up is kind of a cross between a boarding school and maybe psychiatric care or psychological care. And so these kids would come. I say kids. We worked with adolescents where I worked, adolescent boys, and they would come and they would stay for about a year and a half. Typically, some of them were just over a year. Some of them were even 3 or 4 years, but they were kids who had serious problems. and no real place to go. And at that point, some of them were kids that the school districts were sending because they couldn't educate the kids. It was cheaper for them to just send the kids off. A lot of them were kids who weren't making it at home, weren't making it in the community, and they got sent there. So this was my idea. This was going to be a great place. I was going to be able to study how people did things irrationally. I was just going to be able to observe. Well, that plan got blown up like within about a week, because it's like these people did not want to pay me to just observe what people are doing and how people made dumb decisions. They wanted me to actually set limits and do things and help people make better decisions. They didn't want me to just study how they made dumb decisions. So now I've got a whole different question. It's like, if this is what I had before, my original study was going to be about how people get stuck, or what stuck people do, and how people make these irrational decisions. Now they want me to add sort of a second problem to this, which is, how does the change process work? Well, I remember a big aha. I'd been there about 6 months and had burned out several times and kind of gotten up off the mat. And I mean, and this was, I have to say, the thing about this job was that it was set up where it was like a 2-week cycle, where the first week of the 2-week cycle, I would be on campus, including sleeping over at night. I'd be on campus for maybe 100 hours that week. And the second week, I would be there for maybe 20. And so the long weeks were really long. The short weeks were nice, but the long weeks were really, really long. And so I was sick a lot. I was burning out. I was stressed out. It was just, I was learning a lot, but what I was learning was pretty much that everything I thought I knew, I didn't really know. I remember one day, though, there was and I'm thinking about turning points. There were a couple that I want to mention that happened there. The first one happened when I'd been there about 6 months, and we got a new kid in, which we were getting new kids in pretty regularly, but a new kid came into my living group. And this kid was being really obnoxious. And I remember thinking, oh, kid A is just like kid B. This is, God, kid B was it was a pain in the butt, but kid A is exactly like kid B was. Well, then I turned around and looked at kid B, and kid B wasn't acting that way anymore. He used to, but he didn't. And I thought, that's weird. I remember kid B being just like that. But kid B, now that I'm looking at it, he's like kid C used to be, who had been here about 6 months. And kid 6 months ago had been here 6 months. So he's been here about a year now. And kid C is looking a lot like kid D used to look like 6 months ago. And kid D's about to leave. And oh, I see what the progression is. I see what change looks like. It's like, now I understand. You go from A to B to C to D, and then you leave. I got this. This is not hard. I can do this. It's just a question of keeping people on track. But how does change work? Well, what I started realizing as I got into studying how change works is that change is actually constant. It's not a question of how we make something change. It's a question of how we keep things stuck. And so it's a question of what's holding us back. And so I tried to realize, what is the one thing that's holding everybody back? What is the one thing that is holding everybody back? The place that everybody was getting stuck was in their emotional development. So I realized I had to study emotional development. But the problem with that was nobody even understood what emotions were. I didn't understand what emotions were. I didn't understand how emotions worked. Nobody seemed to understand how emotions work. Well, by now, by the time I get to this point, I thought I was going to be there for a year or two and maybe leave to grad school, go become an economist. By now, I'm not thinking I'm going to be an economist anymore. I'm thinking, I'm actually pretty good at this whole change thing. You know, maybe I ought to study psychology, but I definitely do not want to study counseling theory. I don't want to study a bunch of theory. I want to study how people actually work and build something around that. And so I decided I was going to enter a doctoral program at the university, and the doctoral program was going to be in social and developmental psychology. There's some personality psychology thrown in there too, but it was basically social and developmental psychology. And so the first rattle out of the box there, very first class, I was enrolled, and the very first class that I was taking, and actually the other thing, the guy who had taught me into working there, he and I were both actually in there, and we were in a lot of the same classes at the beginning. And so I kept my job by this point, I'm going to work it overnight on the weekends, but I'm going to grad school sort of in the afternoon. Which great schedule. But I'm taking this class, and it's a class that's supposed to be an integration of social and clinical psychology. And so it's like taking a clinical problem and thinking about it as a social psychologist. And so most people are picking small problems. Well, me, I'm sort of an overachiever, I guess. And so I decided I was going to write a paper on borderline personality disorder. If there are any clinicians watching this, then you understand what I'm talking about and what a big chunk I bit off. But it was actually really good, because what it did is it made me read a whole lot of clinical stuff and a whole lot of social psych stuff. And when I wrote the paper, I wrote a pretty credible paper. I basically translated clinical psych into social psych, and the paper pretty stands up pretty well, but I realized what the hole in the paper was. The hole in the paper was that I had to make an assumption. The only way that I could explain the way borderlines act from a social psych perspective was to take an assumption that I'd read in a clinical book that basically said that the reason borderlines don't cry is because they don't have enough ego development, that you have to develop ego to feel sad, and they don't have enough ego development, and so therefore they never feel sad, so therefore they never cry. Now, this was written by somebody who had never seen a borderline cry, because they actually, when borderlines acted stupid, they put them in isolation. And the place I worked, we didn't use isolation, we didn't use timeouts. And I'd actually seen kids who were borderline cry, and it always helped them. It always integrated them. And I also had this suspicion about this whole ego development thing, because, I'd been around newborn infants, and newborn infants cry all the time. And so I'm pretty sure that they don't have sufficient ego development at newborn or 2 months or 3 months. And they clearly appear sad when things are taken away from them or they don't get their way or something. And it's like, okay, this is not working. There's a problem with this. What I realized is that the clinical accounts, they talk about emotions, but what they talk about doesn't make any sense. And at that point in the 80s, social psych was ignoring emotions. They just pretended they didn't exist. And so I knew that nobody understood emotions. And so I needed to get in and study emotions. So I took the second semester in grad school, I took the one class about emotions that was offered. And basically I got theory. I got Darwin, James, Freud, Arnold, Sartre. I got all of that stuff. And the problem with theory is that you can't pick one and say this one's right, because in fact, all of them seem to be right at times. And there are other times that none of them seem to be right. There's never a time that more than one of them is right. And so the question very quickly became, if you don't know, if no one theory is right, is there a meta theory that tells you when something's right? When's it going to tell you about emotions? Now I'm going to go back to my first big idea. It's up to us to do it. Well, I realized that we needed a meta theory to make any sense of this, and nobody else had a theory about how this worked, and nobody else seemed to think we needed one. So it was probably up to me to figure it out. So I'm working at night. I'm going to grad school during the days. I'm working at night on the weekends when nobody else wanted to work, which was great because I didn't really care about what happened at nights on the weekends. I could do whatever I wanted to the rest of the week. I'm reading a lot. I'm trying to read everything I can find about emotions. And in the 80s, that wasn't a lot, I'm going to say. But I find this book that's very interesting. And the guy had coined his own word. His argument was, I don't know what emotions are, and I don't know what feelings are because the definitions aren't clear. The definitions are all over the place. So I coined my own word, which his word was sentix, which is strange. And I was telling one of my workers at night, co-workers at night about this. And it's like, well, this guy talks about sentix. And this guy had already, at this point, he'd already taught me. I considered him a little far out at that point because he taught me like self-meditation, and he taught me or self-hypnosis and how to meditate. And he was all into biofeedback and neurofeedback. And this was back in the mid 80s. I mean, he was way ahead of his time with a lot of this stuff because this was not mainstream at all then. And I told him, well, people don't know the difference between feelings and emotions. And he told me, that's crazy. That's crazy. There's a big difference. I can show you the difference between feelings and emotions. Now, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to say, you may use those words differently. If you're not a native English speaker, you may not use those words at all. You may have your own words. That's okay. I don't want to argue about that. I'm going to tell you how I use the words because they're two very different things. And whatever words you want to put to it, you need to understand that these are two very different things. And once you do them, that's going to help you a lot in the rest of our discussion today. So first, let's talk about feelings. everybody remembers this scene. Just about everybody has seen this movie, first of all. Wherever you live, you've probably seen this movie. Luke Skywalker is flying his TIE fighter down a chasm on the surface of the Death Star. Darth Vader is in hot pursuit. His wingman, Wedge, has just been shot at by Vader, and it crippled his ship, and he had to peel off. And so Luke is flying down the chasm with no protection. He flips the switch to turn on the targeting computer, and the voice of his dead mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, comes and says, "Trust your feelings, Luke." Now, think about the context. He watched Vader kill Obi-Wan Kenobi. So he knows Vader is a bad dude, and Vader is hot on his tail. The voice doesn't say, "Trust your fear, Luke." And this is the Death Star. He knows that the Death Star massacred millions of people on Alderaan. He doesn't say, "Trust your vengeance, Luke." The voice says, "Trust your feelings, Luke." So what is a feeling? The feeling, the easiest way to describe it is as the small, still voice within. Lots of people have used that term. It's actually, it's a sense of expansion and contraction that tells us this is right, this is wrong. Do more of this, do less of this. It's information. It doesn't tell you what to do. It just gives you information. It's more like a guidance system. It's the voice of your higher self. Now, contrast that to emotions. Emotions are hectic and pressured. We feel like we gotta do it. If we don't do it, we get anxious. Do this. Okay, if you don't do it, if you do something you're not supposed to do, they're directives. They tell you exactly what to do. You have to obey them. It's the voice of your ego. It's the voice of your small, isolated self. That's the difference between a feeling and an emotion. Well, now I've gotten to the spot. It's pretty clear. I've realized that there's feelings, there's emotions. I realize that emotional development is important. I'm still not sure I understand emotions. There needs to be some kind of a meta theory, because this is just, it's still very confusing. Most of what people say they believe about emotions is not completely true, or they're talking about maybe at one time it makes sense, but in another time it doesn't make sense. I'm going to try to, I need to, at this point, it's clear that this grad school is not going to work. We're not going to be a good match, because the grad school, the University of Texas grad school, was at that point still run by behaviorists. And they were grudgingly admitting that cognition existed, but they were not going to let anybody study emotions. And at this point, I was convinced that emotions were the important thing that people didn't understand, and we needed to. That was the key to unlocking a whole lot of stuff. And so it got to be where we had to, one of the requirements, the degree requirements, was that we had to propose some kind of a study that we would do as our doctoral dissertation. And so I proposed this study that I thought was pretty good. An old behaviorist slammed it apart. It was just terrible. This is the worst thing he'd ever seen, and basically failed it, which meant that I wasn't going to be able to do it. I wasn't going to pass this thing. And I was, at this point, was going to have to take a terminal master's degree. Well, a terminal master's degree in social and developmental psychology is not going to get you very far. And so it's like, how do I turn this around and make this into something? And it was pretty clear that what I was going to have to do was take the hours and add a few more to it somewhere else, and at least have a master's degree that I could do therapy with. By the way, that study I proposed, one of the big names did almost exactly that same study 2 years later, and it became like one of the most widely cited pieces in social psychology that year. Just saying. Okay. Yeah, that guy was off. But anyway, now it was time to look into theories of therapy, because I'd always avoided. I'd always avoided the theories of therapy because I knew they were wrong. I knew they were way off track. But at this point, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's like emotions. Maybe some of them are right sometimes and others are right other times. And how do people know what they want to do? How do they know what the right thing to do is? Well, I did two things. One is I studied what do the best therapists do. And it turns out that the best therapists, there's sort of three stages. There's like, you don't know anything, then you know your theory, and apply it, or you get to a stage where no matter what theory you start at, everybody's doing the same thing. They all kind of converge, and you doing the same thing no matter what your theory is. It's like, okay, those are the people to figure out how people are doing that. But I have to figure out how other people are doing this. Well, I'm still working in the same place, and we do a lot of therapy. And we're watching people, I'm seeing people all the time doing stuff. And so it's like, I can talk to them. We have relationships. We all know each other. It's like, what do you believe in? What do you do? What do you think helps people change? What is it that you're looking at? Well, and I got a million answers. It's motivation, it's development, it's physiology, it's relationships, it's their thinking, it's their beliefs, it's whatever. I mean, people had a million different answers, but when I watched what they actually did, they all did the same thing, which was that they intervened with the emotions. And so it's like, okay, once again, I'm realizing that the emotions are the important parts. But then sometimes the interventions would work, and sometimes they didn't work. And I couldn't figure out, if everybody's doing the same thing and they're all intervening with emotions, why does it work sometimes and not work other times? And I came to the turning point. And this is the key turning point that everything else is going to turn around, I think. And when I say it, it may sound silly and stupid, but I'm going to tell this story anyway. By this point, it's like, it's clear that I'm, terminal master's degree. I'm going to have to go and do do more grad work. I'm going to have to go do something, and I'm not going to be able to do it at the university. I'm going to have to do it somewhere else. And it's probably going to have to be therapy. And I'm trying to figure out, before I get into having to learn all this dumb theory, it's sort of what works and what doesn't work, so that I'm at least inoculated from learning a bunch of stuff and making a lot of the same mistakes everybody else has. Well, one thing about this campus is it's very open. Kids just kind of come up and talk to adults and get help that they need. And so I'm talking to the clinical director one day. He and I are just kind of talking outside the dining room or something at lunchtime, and a kid walks up to him, and his name is Steve. It's also Steve. And he comes up to him and says, Steve, I'm so pissed off at my group. And it's this one kid, blah, 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 blah. He did this and this and this and this and this, and I'm so pissed off. And my whole group, and Steve is like shaking. Yeah. It sounds like when you used to get embarrassed about the way your mother treated you. Not what the kid's talking about at all. No, you don't understand. That's not it. That's not about my mother. It's about the kid, blah, 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 and the whole group. And then that's, yeah. Sounds like the way you used to get when your mother would embarrass you. This went on for like 10 minutes. And finally, I could see the light bulb go on in the kid. And it's like, God, you're right. This is exactly like when my mom embarrassed me. This is like the same thing that went on with me when my mom embarrassed me. Thanks. And left. Now I've got a question. It's like, okay, wait a minute. How did you know to do that? The kid came up and said he was pissed off. You never talked about him being pissed off. How in the world did you know that it had to do with his mother embarrassing him? Well, I know his history and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, I've read the records. Okay, fine. Let's change the context. If you're in private practice, I'm assuming you're not going to have all these same records, right? No, probably not. Okay, how would you know it there? How would you know that his being pissed off was really about his mother embarrassing him? I don't know. That's a good question. I'd have to find a way to figure it out. It's like, that's the key right there. I have to figure that out. That's what I need to know. How do you know what the thing is really about and not what the person says it's about? I don't have a clue how to do that at this point. I'm thinking, okay, this is it. But what I realize is, walking out of that conversation, is that I'd always thought there were emotions and there were feelings, but I just realized that there were actually, besides feelings, there were actually, in that situation, there were two different emotions. There was the emotion that I thought was going on, or that the kid thought was going on, which was that he was pissed off at his group. And then there was the emotion hiding around beneath it, which was, this is how things get when my mom embarrasses me. And this is how I get when mom embarrasses me was really the one that was getting stepped on, that was driving a lot of the behavior. But the symptom was a combination of the two of them. And it was like, okay, how do I read symptoms to know what the thing is underneath? So at that point, I knew there was more than one type of emotion. What I since discovered going through a lot of literature and a lot of trial and error, is there actually 5 types of emotion. Now I'm just going to list these off really quickly. So there are foreign emotions, there are bypassed emotions, there are instrumental emotions, there are fused emotions, and there's reactive emotions. And once I understood that, and I understood how each of those is formed, I realized that each of those 5 corresponds to a specific developmental area or developmental level in the development of emotions. And removing those or growing past those also responds to a specific developmental level. So this is another good place to stop for a second, take a break. Everybody, we have any questions? Are we all still good?
Can you please repeat those 5? I've got 4 words. Foreign, bypass, something, fuse, and reactive. What's the third one? Did I get that right?
It's okay. I'm going to go through all of them here in a minute.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. Then I'm going to put everybody back on mute. Y'all are doing great. Thank you everybody for playing along. Okay. So we're going to talk about development here. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to come to the camera here. We'll go through development pretty quickly. This is going to be a side track, but we need to talk about development just briefly. And mothers are going to understand this, I think. But we've got human beings are, the way humans are born is different than most animals. So if you think about horses or deer or something like that, when a horse is born, the mother licks it and it's up running around that day. Okay, that clearly we don't do as humans. If you think about elephants, there's 2 different kinds of elephants. There's African elephants, there's Asian elephants. One of them, the gestation period is 18 months, and the other one, the gestation period is more like 22 months. So if you think about, if you're a mom or you know a mom or you're married to a mom or you're expecting kids, think about carrying for 22 months and giving birth to an elephant. Okay, that doesn't sound like any fun to anybody. The problem with humans is that as a design problem, we don't walk on all 4s. We walk standing up. And even a newborn, as defenseless as a newborn is, as immature as a newborn is, if we were going to carry a newborn until they actually had adult capabilities, they could actually get up and walk around and do all of that stuff like a deer can or a horse can, we would have to carry them for like 2.5 years. That's clearly not going to happen. That can't happen. Even at 9 months, what happens is that you've got a baby's skull, which is maybe so big around that to be born, has to pass through a hole that's about so big around. Okay. Now I understand about contractions and oxytocin and all of that stuff that gets the hole bigger, but still that's an incredible amount of pressure. If an infant was fully formed, they would all be born brain damaged. There's no other way around it. So here's what I want you to do. Take your hand and put it like this on the back of your neck, and where your fingers, you should have like these two fingers should overlap the bottom of your skull. The rest of your fingers can be on your neck, and that's where you're touching right now. Like this much on this side and this much on the other side is where your cerebellum is. This little spot in the middle, that's your brain stem. And your brain stem is the only thing that's active when you're born. Everything else is waiting to come online. The cortex, all the cells have been created, but none of them are in place. The cortex isn't online. The only thing that's online is the brainstem. And the brainstem is basically set in utero. The brainstem, what it does is autonomic functions. It's responsible for things like heart rate, respiration, body temperature, just all the automatic kinds of stuff that happens in life that we don't think about at all, that just kind of comes off like clockwork. And all of that is set in utero, where the fetus basically picks up the mom's heart rate and respiration rate and temperature and all of that kind of stuff and just matches it. Okay, this is the way we're supposed to do it. This is what we're going to do. That's all that functions when you're born. It's just raw survival. Now, what your brain does, all brains develop from inside to outside, from back to front, and from bottom to top. Okay? I actually said that in the wrong order. It's from inside to outside, from bottom to top, from back to front. That's the correct order. Hormones, depending on the hormones you get in utero, there's this critical period that you get specific kind of hormone baths. And in general, males have a hormone bath that's more testosterone. In general, females have a hormone bath that's more estrogen, but things get messed up in there, and some of that, it's variable. It depends on what else is going on. It depends on what else is going on with the mom. It depends on a lot of other things, but that's a general rule. So I can say, as a general rule, now this has more to do with hormones than it does with genetics. This has seemingly everything to do with hormones at that specific period in gestation. Girls' brains develop from left to right, and boys' brains develop from right to left. Now, what does that mean? If you think about it, young girls are quieter, they're more verbal, they're more logical, they're more social, they're smarter, they get along better, they're more cooperative, they're doing all the left hemispheric stuff. Little boys, on the other hand, are more rambunctious, more moody, more impulsive, more rowdy. They break down easier. They kind of they have emotional meltdowns. Boys are more emotional. Now, what happens is at puberty, our brains start to develop the other side. But so as an adolescent, boys become more social, they become more verbal, they become more logical. They do a lot of stuff as in adolescence, but they're never as logical as girls. They're never as verbal as girls. They aren't. They talk as much, but they're not as verbal. Now, again, this is in general. This is like the big picture. Girls, on the other hand, they cross over to the right side, and in adolescence, girls become more emotional. They're more emotional than they were. They're never as emotional as guys are. I understand that the societal sort of presupposition is that women are emotional. It's just not true. I'm just going to say it. They're actually less emotional. Women's emotions are more based on what they're thinking. Guys' thinking is more based on what emotions are going on with them. Women talk about their emotions more, but that's because women are more verbal. And by the time women become more emotional, they already have a pretty good verbal acumen, and they're able, it's like a new experience, and they'll come up with words for it. With guys, it's all kind of lost in the background. And so when you find people who have serious emotional disorders like autism or psychopathy, most of the time, nearly all the time, it's males. It's something where there's some kind of an emotional problem going on that they never picked up because it's just background noise. All right. So one of the things about development that I need to say, all development, when we think about developmental stages, it's all really caused by changes in brain characteristics. The way the brain develops, as I said, inside out, bottom to top, back to front, and then side to side, the way that it develops, it has a sense of include and surpass. So what happens is that every time a new part of the brain comes online, it kind of takes over from everything that it takes charge over everything that came before. But what it does is it includes what was already there and then just adds to it. It surpasses it. It includes it and integrates it to create a new package. And the way it does that is with brain waves. So you may have heard of brain waves, but the way brain waves work is that each specific part of your brain has a brain wave that it uses to communicate with itself. And every time a new brain wave is added, that brain wave becomes sort of the control of the one beneath it. But at the same time, that doesn't keep the one beneath it from stopping. What it does is it actually makes the one beneath it less conscious. You're conscious of the one on top. The ones beneath it, the further it is beneath it, the less conscious it is. I hope that makes sense. So we start with the brainstem, and the brainstem is controlled by delta. In delta is the predominant It's really the only brainwave functioning for the first, say, 4 to 6 months of life. And it really is the predominant brainwave for the first year of life. It fades off after that. In adults, you only see it when people are in a deep dreamless sleep or when they're in a coma. You don't otherwise see it too much in adults, but it's still there kind of working around in the background. It's always there because your heart's always beating and that kind of stuff. After delta, the next thing that develops is your midbrain, what we sometimes call the limbic system. The limbic system is sort of the middle part of your brain. It's called the rat brain sometimes, but what it does is it communicates with your heart, with your gut, where a lot of external processing is done by the brain. Mostly emotional based processing is done in the heart and the gut. And so the brain wave that runs the limbic system is the theta wave. Theta wave is the predominant wave that you see in people it comes online at like 4 months when the limbic system first starts to kick in a little bit and you start to form relationships in earnest. It's really the predominant wave until about 7. And at that point, it fades off slowly. In adults, you only see it in waking time when people are like learning a new dance step or something like that that takes significant coordination, and they have to actually get it down to automate it where they can do it really well. You see it in musicians sometimes when they're playing the same thing over and over and over and over again to get the rhythm of it and get their muscle memory working, whether it's playing a guitar, playing a piano, playing a horn, whatever. You're having to get the muscle memory down. That's theta. It's what's active during REM sleep, which is when we consolidate memories. Like I said, it's the most active thing for when we're between 1 and 7, which is really when our programming takes place. When we think about children getting programmed, that's when it happens. The next thing up from theta is the alpha rhythm. And the alpha rhythm is really centralized in our temporal lobes, which is like right here behind our ears. The temporal lobes are where we store memory. It's where we store information. It's where, especially auditory memory. It's a lot of contextual stuff. It's a lot of contextual memory. And so alpha is very associated with listening, and listening attentively, listening unquestioningly, just in a kind of an open acceptance kind of listening. Okay, that is the primary brainwave when people are between, say, 8 and 13. So maybe 2nd or 3rd grade up through middle school are pretty much alpha is the main thing. It's also, you see it in adults when people are awake, but they're sort of attentive. They're coasting's not the right word. They used to consider it kind of an idling gear, but it's like if you're sitting in a lecture and you're really rapt, you're really taking in everything that the other person is saying, like I hope you are now while I'm talking about this. What you would be in, if that's true, if you're not fidgeting and distracting yourself, would be alpha, which leads to beta. And beta is a frontal lobe thing. that's sort of the last part of your brain that comes online, is the frontal cortex. Beta is really about logic and yeah, logic, cognition, what we call cognition, serious cognition. It's about logic, it's about problem solving, it's about planning, it's about integration. That's how beta works. And then after that, there's high beta. When they first looked at this, they had, okay, so there's beta, but beta goes up pretty far. And then they realized, well, that there are actually different characteristics of it. High beta is very intense problem solving, but it's mostly seen in adults in one specific stage, which we'll talk about. And it's really a high stress kind of panic response. And finally, there's gamma. Gamma is the last brainwave, and they actually had not discovered this one until fairly recently, because the equipment they were using to monitor brainwaves just didn't detect it. But gamma is the highest frequency brainwave. Each of these is a higher frequency than the one before it. And I mean, by frequency, I mean, actually, you can look at the waves and you can look at the frequency. So delta is like under 4, and gamma is like over 100. So that'll tell you sort of what the frequencies are. Gamma is actually controlled by the same part of the brain that controls theta. It's controlled by the thalamus, which is like the switchboard in the middle of your limbic system. But what gamma does is it actually it sweeps through your brain kind of back and forth. And what it does is it integrates things, but it integrates things by piggybacking on one of the other frequencies and just riding that frequency and creating integrations using that frequency. So those are the brain waves. That's everything about development, and I'm going to unmute everybody and make sure we're all good. Are we all still good?
Yeah, good.
Good. Good. Everybody else is good?
Yeah.
Okay. No questions? Okay. Well, I should be more interactive. I understand that. I'm looking through who's here. It's good. Glad to see everybody here. Glad to see everybody who's been able to make it. Okay, let me go back. And once again, I'm sorry that this isn't as beautiful for you as I'd planned or hoped, but you know, we do what we have to do. So now we're going to talk about different stages, and this is where it's going to come together. I think all of that stuff I talked about is sort of setting the context for how this all works, and hopefully by explaining how all of those things are hooked together. Now remember how we started. It's like, how do I know what I want to do? Well, how does anybody know what they want to do? Well, how do people keep themselves from knowing what they want to do? Well, how does not knowing, how do we keep ourselves from doing anything? How does change happen? How do we keep change from happening? How does emotional development work? How do emotions work? Well, now we're finally at the spot where we can talk about emotional development, emotions and emotional development, which I think as we answer this, it'll answer all of the other questions. So that's why you got to hear me talk about my story so long, to get to the payoff here. before I get into that, I want to say something. This was something I had names for these, and I'd read some things about development, and I'd understood kind of the stages, but in the last few months, I was actually having a conversation with a lady, and I don't know if she was invited. I didn't see her name. I'm not sure if she made it here or not. But we were talking about people because we were talking about development on a different line. We were talking about development of sort of entrepreneurial skills, and so there's a spectrum, and it goes from infrared to ultraviolet, and people are somewhere along this developmental spectrum in terms of their entrepreneurial skills. And she started talking about, well, you know, if you deal with red people, they're like this. If you deal with infrared people, they're like this. And I was thinking, yeah, okay, that's like people in stage 2. And if you deal with red people, they're like this. And it's like, oh, well, she's talking about people in stage 3. Well, then I started realizing it's like, oh, wait a minute. It is the same. This is all the same. It's all the same development. Where I had messed up is that there was just, where I hadn't understood it before, is that there's actually a stage before infrared in emotional development. Maybe that wasn't important to him, but there's a stage before infrared, and once you realize that, then everything maps. And so we're going to start talking about the stage before infrared, which I call the radio wave stage. Now, if you look at the spectrum, radio waves are actually down past infrared, so that makes sense. But I'm going to say that it's a good metaphor for this stage. And it's a stage from 0 to 1. It is the stage that's run by delta. It's the stage that's run by autonomic processing. And so basically what a child is doing from 0 to 1 is moving into their body. They are, they, as a young child, if you've been around young children, first they move around, but they don't have any control of their limbs. They flail around, they can't do anything. And somehow over the course of the first year, they go from flailing around and not being able to control anything to be able to sit up, to being able to crawl, to being able to stand up, to being able to walk. And a lot of times, usually by the end of the first year, they're able to say their first words. They've gone from kind of random noises to babbling to kind of sing-songy babbling to actually forming words and saying words and giving meaning to the words. It's saying words and knowing what they're talking about by the end of 1 year. That's what we're talking about here. And there's the emotional development that goes along with that. Now, all of that, it's like I say, it's all pretty much autonomic, although it's becoming more and more relationship-oriented autonomic, but it's pretty much instinct. It's driven biologically. Everybody kind of, unless there's something really wrong, and sometimes there is, but unless there's something wrong, people kind of sit up at the same basic age, and they sit up before they crawl, and they have to go in order. Emotionally, this is a stage where there's no boundaries. It's sort of pre-boundary. And so because of that, when you think about like a nursing infant, if the mom starts getting tense, the mom doesn't even have to do anything. The mom just starts getting a little tense, and the child kind of spits out the nipple and starts screaming, just arches back and starts screaming really loudly. Emotion at that age is debilitating, and it's not necessarily my emotion. It could be mom's emotion. It could be my emotion from not getting fed, but it's not really experienced as my emotion or mom's emotion. It's just experienced as something is off, something feels painful, I don't like it. If you think about a 6-month-old kid who is startled, the 6-month-old kid just melts down. I mean, they just are sitting on the floor, they look startled, and then all of a sudden they start screaming. And they need to be picked up and held and comforted, because any emotion is experienced as debilitating. This is the stage of foreign emotions. And a foreign emotion is any emotion that I'm picking up from elsewhere that's not me. When we think about kids getting programmed by their parents, one of the things that we do that's a mistake, I'm convinced is a severe mistake, is we think that our parents give us beliefs about money, intimacy, whatever. They do, but what they really do, if we want to change that, what we have to look at is what they give us at the before one stage. And that is the emotions that they have about money, intimacy, work, whatever. That's what we pick up. We pick that up, and then we spend the next few years trying to make sense of it. And that's where we pick up the beliefs from our parents. But first we pick up that anchor, which is foreign emotions. We pick up how other people are relating to life around us, and we're attaching to it. Because we don't have any boundaries, we experience it as mine. Oh, this must be part of me. Now we get to the second stage, and the second stage is the infrared stage. The infrared stage is from 1 to about 3.5, and it's dominated by the theta rhythm, which is, we said, the theta is programming. From 1 to 3.5, we are ripe to be programmed. This is a point where we're not really thinking yet. When we're thinking, it's magical. We don't understand how things work. So a 3-year-old, this is a kid, you ask them, what's going on? Why is the cloud moving? And he says, oh, well, that cloud has another friend over there who's another cloud, and he's going over to see his friend. It's very magical. It's very idiosyncratic, and it's very, it's very animistic. Emotionally, we're coming off of foreign emotions. And so at this point, we are tiptoeing. It's like at this point, we know sometimes mom is happy, sometimes mom is unhappy. I like it when mom's happy. I don't like it when mom's unhappy. I don't know what it is that makes mom happy and what makes mom unhappy. I think it has something to do with my behavior, but I'm going to be very careful about how I do things in a very magical kind of way to keep her from being upset. This is a stage where emotions are overwhelming. Everything is overwhelming. This is a stage where emotions are so threatening that, or so overwhelming that it's threatening. And our response is to freeze. And so we freeze, sometimes physically, always internally. When we see this in adults, this kind of freeze response, we think of it as dissociation a lot of times. This is the beginning, this and the next stage are the beginning of what we would think of as the emotional stage. And this is where we pick up, or we start bypassing emotions, which is the second kind. They're bypassed emotions. And essentially what a bypassed emotion is any emotion that is so overwhelming when we experience it that we don't know how to deal with it. So we just don't. We try to act like it's not there. We try to magic it away. We try to pretend that if we just don't notice it, then maybe it'll go away, or it won't hurt so bad. And usually if we pretend it's not there long enough, it won't hurt so bad and it will kind of go away. But this is, in the story about the kid with Steve, the bypassed emotion is kind of how the kid dealt with mom embarrassing him. That was the bypassed emotion. That was the one that you don't pay attention to, that's in the background driving the behavior. So now we move to the third stage. So we've got the first stage, we've got radio waves. We've got the second stage, the infrared stage, where we've got we've got bypassed emotions. Now we're at the third stage. And the third stage is the red stage. The red stage is from about 3.5 to 7. And this is also theta. Piaget called all of this the pre-operational stage. There is a dividing line in here. There's actually a precipitating event. Now, the pre-operational stage, what that means is basically it's like people are just thinking crazy. They're not thinking clearly. Piaget was really interested in how people grow up to be scientists, how their thinking grows up into something resembling the scientific method. And he was looking at his kids to see how they did that. And then he looked at other kids, and other people have looked at that. But that's why he called it pre-operational, is because there's really no operations. It's just kind of random. So he missed this kind of stage juncture in the middle of pre-operations, the big precipitating event. And as I said earlier, it's because of brain growth. If you take your fingers, if you take 2 fingers and put them, well, I can't do it with this thing. Okay, put it right here over your right ear, and then kind of come up like that. That point where you're pointing right there, just about right there, is where your temporal lobe on the side here meets your parietal lobe, which is up here on the top. And deep inside the fold there, where the 2 lobes of your brain meet, it's a little piece that's called the right temporoparietal juncture. And it comes online at about age 3.5. All the research seems to show that the right temporoparietal juncture is where the sense of ourselves as separate from everybody else resides. And so the precipitating event that happens when you're about 3.5 years old is that you've been thinking, gosh, sometimes mom's upset, sometimes mom is fine. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make sure that to do this. I don't have any control over this. I wish I had some control over this. And all of a sudden, that area develops and something happens and mom's upset, and you realize, oh, now I know why mom's upset. She's upset at me. I'm different. She's upset at me. I'm a screw up. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. There's something really wrong with me. Now, some people get stuck there, but most people don't get stuck there for too long, because what happens next is that you start looking around and you realize by now you've realized, gosh, you know what? I can act like I don't think there's anything wrong with me. In fact, I can act like there's nothing wrong with me. In fact, I'm fine. And the more I act like I'm fine and there's nothing wrong with me, what I start realizing pretty quickly is that everybody else is acting the same way. Everybody else is acting like there's nothing wrong with them either. And they're screwing up too. They're screwing up as much as I did. They're not doing, I mean, mom is getting mad at me for not doing right, but mom's doing things she's not supposed to be doing too. And dad's doing things he's not supposed to be doing. And really, everybody's kind of screwing up. It's not just me. I'm not the only screw up. Okay, screw this. Screw this. I'm a separate self. What I have to do is look out for myself. These people clearly, they want to blame me for not doing what I'm supposed to do, but they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing either. I got to get mine. This is the birth of the ego. Before that, we have sort of an unconscious sense of who we are, but we have this precipitating event, and now we consciously know who we are. The ego comes in and I'm thinking, what do I have to do to make sure I get mine? And I sell out. I sell out big time for three things: control, security, and approval. Now, one of the things I realized pretty quickly, if I can fake like everything's fine and I'm okay, and everybody else is already faking like everything's fine and they're okay, what difference does it make? I can fake anything. I can act, I remember that one time I was really tired and acted angry and had a tantrum in the store and got my way. I wonder if that'd work. I wonder that one time I was feeling really bad and I acted kind of pathetic and I got my way. I wonder if that'd work. And so now all of a sudden I'm acting in all sorts of ways to try to get what I want. Now, this is a very high stress thing. We've now moved from freeze, we've moved to fight or flight. This is something where I have to keep moving. I'm being active. I'm still under threat, but I can contain it as long as I'm active and as long as I'm one step ahead of everybody else and I kind of outsmart the game. So what we have is instrumental emotions. Instrumental means I'm doing it to get something from it. These are ones Sartre was talking about. I throw over the chessboard because I don't want to lose the game. And this is something that we do at 4. This is a typical 4-year-old move, is to do instrumental emotions. Most instrumental emotions, I'm going to say it could be different things, but most of it is anger or being picked on. It's either I'm mad so I can back you off to get my way, or I'm acting like you're picking on me so that I can get you to back off and I can get my way. So now we've covered the first three. I'm going to take a sip of tea here. I want to have a brief interlude here. I want to talk about network theory. You've probably heard, I know I've heard, you've probably heard and read somebody who says something like, all emotions come from what we think and what we believe. And I want to say that in psychology, they have been trying to prove that since just about the time I was in my first grad school. And the evidence for it is weak. It's really, and when I say weak, if so many people didn't believe it, they would have already gotten rid of it as a theory. It's not true. The evidence shows that it's not true. And there's a variety of ways that it's shown it's not true. One is that you can give people, you can say, these are the things you have to believe to get sad, for instance. You can give people only some of those things and people will get sad anyway, but if you ask them why they got sad, they will say that you gave them all of them. If you look at the timing of when people have when the hormones first start and when their body posture changes compared to when they actually process all the information, the physiological changes start happening before the mental stuff is processed. They'll tell you they process the mental stuff first, but it didn't happen that way. The physiological stuff comes first. You can also do things to change people physiologically where you can maybe change their breathing or their posture or something like that. So for instance, you put somebody in a maybe a very uncomfortable chair that molds their posture into a certain position, and then you have them do a breathing exercise while they're in that chair. And so you've sort of unconsciously manipulated their posture and their breathing outside their awareness. And what happens is an emotion will come out of it. Their memories will start getting flooded with that emotion, their facial expression, their physiology, everything changes to match that emotion. The thinking may or may not ever happen. The belief may or may not ever happen, but the person actually becomes motivated to act in that way, even unconsciously. So the weight of the evidence is with something called network theory. And network theory is that everything is connected. And all you do is, if you activate 2 or 3 of those things between body posture and facial expression and breathing patterns and voice tone and motivation and memories and identity, beliefs, and there's all that stuff is connected, and all you have to do is change a couple of those and the whole thing will spring into being. That anything can activate it. It does not have to be thinking. So the reason I'm saying that is I want to point out what's been happening in the last 2 weeks worldwide, if you've been watching social media. And it's kind of gone through waves. So there was a wave where there was a lot of contagion, people picking up each other's panic. And there was a day that everybody was panicking. Well, that contagion is really a radio wave thing. It's a foreign emotion thing. And so what was happening is that everybody was debilitated. they were like the 6-month-old who was just sitting in the middle of the room screaming, waiting to be picked up. And there was nobody there to pick them up. So then you get to the second stage. And the second stage was when people started disowning parts of themselves. They put themselves into an infrared stage. It's like, oh, I would never do that. Oh, that's not me. Oh, that's not. And they were disowning bits of themselves, which was then, and that was most evident with people who'd suffered previous trauma, but we've all suffered some kind of trauma. And so we went through stages of that where all of a sudden everybody was doing this kind of tiptoeing around thing where we were trying to see, okay, is everybody going to be okay? Is everybody going to be okay? Are things going to work out okay? Then we got into the image stage. And the image stage, it's like, well, I have to act, I have to make sure that I'm taken care of. If this is about me, I have to make sure that nobody's infringing on me and mine. And so then you start getting very red kind of thinking. We get sort of anger, a lot of anger, a lot of blaming, a lot of, it's not my fault, it's their fault. It's the damn Chinese who didn't tell us the truth. Oh, it's Trump who didn't close the borders in time or make everybody go to the house, or whoever it was, the media, whoever it is you want to blame. It's like everybody's picked sides to blame somebody. I just want to point that out. It's not that people are stuck in one spot, although some of them are. But what happens is when we're put under high stress, everybody has a tendency to regress if they're not careful. Okay, so now we get to the orange stage. The orange stage runs from 8 to 13. The orange stage is dominated by alpha, which, if you remember, is about listening. It's about sort of uncritical listening. It's what Piaget called concrete operational stage. And concrete operations, the best way to describe it is like if you take a flask of water and you pour it into another flask that's a different shape, and you ask a child which has more water, the first one or the second one, a 5-year-old will tell you, oh, well, the first one had more water because it's taller. And a 10-year-old will look at you like you're stupid. And it's like, well, it's the same water. It's the same water. It doesn't matter what flask you put it in. It's the same water. That's concrete operations. We have emotions that go along with that. The best way to describe this stage in every respect is with a saying, it is what it is. You just accept, yours is not to question why. It just is what it is. Things are the way they are, and you just accept them the way they are. Now, at this point, we've now moved with our threat response. We've moved from freeze to fight to flight, and now we go to the third level, which is dyadic regulation. So from 8 to 13, this is the stage where we have best friends. These are the people who are going to hang with us no matter what, although I'm still not going to probably tell them that I think there's something really wrong with me, because if I do, then maybe they'll think there is something really wrong with me and they won't be my best friend anymore. Excuse me, I need to cough. But this is a stage of uncritical thinking. We don't question things. We just accept the way things are. If people tell us, and if it's somebody that we believe that they're like us, they're one of our friends or somebody we believe is like us and has our same values, then we accept what they say without questioning. The emotions at this stage are what I call fused emotions. And a fused emotion is actually when you've got a piece of a bypassed emotion, and you've got a piece of sort of my manipulative emotion that I've stuck on the top of it. And so this is actually what we're seeing a lot of today. So today I was looking at the news, and I'm seeing a lot of frustration. I'm seeing people out doing protests and stuff, and there's like it was like a picture in Denver of a healthcare worker dressed in scrubs who was standing out in the middle of the street, keeping these angry MAGA supporters from coming down to protest that everybody should be able to get out of their house because, you know, they're demanding their freedom. And the healthcare worker is like, no, you don't. You know, just stay here. And so there was a lot of frustration, especially from the couple in the pickup truck. But that's kind of what we've gotten to. We've gotten to this level of blame and frustration, and those are fused emotions. Essentially, what you've got is you've got this instrumental anger that's gotten pasted on top of some real sadness because things are not the way that they were. They're not the way that I want them to be. I'm missing the way that things are. So instead of being honest with you and with myself about feeling sad, I kind of put that aside and I staple blame on top of it. I staple anger on top of it. And it comes out as blame. It comes out as frustration. It comes out as hostility. There are various levels. It comes out as resentment sometimes. All of those are variations of anger being put on top of bypassed sadness. I believe I said this earlier. If I didn't, in adults, most bypassed emotion, well, I won't say most, but the two that are most obviously or most frequently bypassed are shame and grief. And so you get a lot of stuff that are variants of shame or grief with instrumental anger put on. With shame and anger, you get rage is the typical one. But also with fear and anger, you get fury, which is kind of the whole fight or flight thing is fury. You get there's a lot of times that you get these fused emotions. Now, the reason that really maps to this stage is because we accept it as a real thing. We accept that frustration is a real thing. It's a real emotion. We don't ever question that really I'm not angry. Really what's going on is I'm sad, or I'm ashamed, or whatever, because it's partly because it's too painful. But it's, if you read like the family therapy literature, the Gottmans will talk about how most couple disagreements are unsolvable. And the reason they're unsolvable is because they're framed as fused emotions. It's impossible to solve frustration. If I try to talk through my frustration, I just get more frustrated. If I try to talk through rage, I feel more rage. If I try to talk through fury, I feel more fury. What I have to do is get past the anger part, just realize I put that on top of it and go to what's beneath. the sadness or shame or whatever. That's how fused emotions are resolved. So now we're up through orange. We get to yellow. The yellow stage happens typically from 18 to 22 or so. It's basically our high school and college or university years. And this is run by beta. This is run by our good old frontal lobes. This is what Piaget called formal operations, which is, there's a couple of pieces of formal operations. One is if-then logic. If I do this, then that happens. If this happens, then this other thing will happen. But it's all very linear thinking. It's very much linear logic. Yellow is the stage of capitalism. If I buy, or if I create something that responds to this market demand, then people will buy it and I will be able to make money. And then I can spend the money on getting things that I want. It's the stage of, I wrote emotional intelligence. It's not really the stage, I mean, it is. So let me talk about emotional intelligence here for a second. Meyer and Salovey, who developed emotional intelligence to begin with, I think are probably in the green stage. I think they're the next stage. Goleman, who popularized it, I think is probably in the blue stage, but it's been sold as a yellow concept. It's been sold to capitalists, and it's really popular at the yellow stage with the idea of, if I act this way, then I can make a sale. If I do this, then I'll form the relationships that allowed me to make a later sale. So it's been sold as a very yellow concept. Besides if-then logic, the other thing that happens at this age is self-reflective thinking. Some people think of it as navel gazing. It's where identity develops. So before that, at 3.5, 4, we had a sense of self. We had a sense of ourselves as a separate being. But by the time we're 14 to 18, we're developing a sense of, well, but what if I do this? How would that, if I do this, how would that change who I am? If I do that, how would that change who I am? Which is really, it's a thinking about who we are. It's sort of a reflexive thinking about our sense of self. Emotions follow the same path, the same reflexive path. And this is where we get what is called reactive emotions. And a reactive emotion is your emotions about your other emotions. And I want to say, when you do sexual differences, this is where females are much, they do a lot of reactive emotions, more than males do. So the way reactive emotions work, as I say, it's your emotion about your other emotions. So it could be, I'm embarrassed that I got angry earlier, or I'm angry at myself that I blushed earlier. It could work either way, but what it really comes down to most of the time, most fear is reactive. Virtually all fear is reactive. And it's really about some unknown but not yet experienced inner sensation. It's another emotion. So for instance, I'm scared to say this to this person because if I do, then they may not like me anymore. And I don't know how I would be able to handle that. I'm scared about this because I might humiliate myself. I'm scared about doing this because it would be so embarrassing and I don't know how I would deal with the embarrassment. And so when you look at things like fear of failure and fear of success and fear of a lot of other stuff, the stuff that people say they're the most afraid of, fear of public speaking. Okay, what is it really? Public talking is good. You're scared to talk? You've been talking since you were 1. No, I'm not scared of talking. I'm scared that other people might judge me and I would feel on the spot and that would feel bad. And I'm scared of how I would deal with feeling that bad. That's a reactive fear. Okay. Now, of all of the different kinds of emotions, when I said that there's a sort of this idea that emotions are caused by our thinking, this is the one kind it really is. Reactive emotions are caused by our thinking, 100%. And the way to deal with them is to deal with our thinking, but not in the way that we're generally told. So now we go on to the next level. The next level is the green level. The green level, if it starts at all, it could start at age 22. It could start somewhere earlier. It could start somewhere later. Some people outgrow it. A lot of people don't outgrow it. That's all a little confusing. That not everybody gets there. Not everybody gets to yellow, to be honest. At the green level, we're talking about is a brain wave. We're talking about high beta. We're talking about serious problem solving. We're talking about serious panic. We're talking about systems thinking. We're talking about complex logic. If the yellow level was linear, if this happens, then that happens. At the systems thinking level, it's like, if I do something or somebody does something over here, then it can cause all of these interactions all the way across to cause some unknown effect over here. And so what do we do that starts the ripples that get things moving at the other end? The green stage is also the age of maximum defensiveness. I mean, this is high beta, it's highly ego-focused, it's highly panicky, it is highly defensive. The only way to get past this is to break down your defenses. This is a stage that, remember, the yellow stage was very much about logic. Well, at the green stage, they see the limits of logic. They've seen that logic doesn't work. And so they've realized that feelings are more important than logic. The problem is that they don't distinguish feelings from emotions like we did earlier. And so what they do is they give rein to their emotions over logic too, which leads to narcissism, essentially. It's a lot of acting out. Now, I want to talk briefly, I want to have another little break here and talk about, I called it here on this slide, I called it a third, a third, a third. It's not really a third, but if you look at adults in modern society, America, I think Western Europe, I'm not sure about everywhere else, but we've got three basic divisions, the three groups of adults, and it's probably more like 30% in each. But you've got about 30% who function at the orange level, about 30% who function at the yellow level, and about 30% who function at the green level. Typically, not always, but typically, the people at the orange level are the most conservative. They tend to be older. They tend to be high school educated. They tend to have professions like agriculture, mechanic, police, firefighting, plumbing, electrician, that kind of stuff. They tend to be people who do hourly work. And at the orange level, the way you do things, the way you get ahead in the world is you sell your time. And the more of your time you can sell and the harder you can work, the better your life can be. But like I said, at the orange level, you don't really question how things are. They're just, that's the way they are. And so the people in the pickup truck complaining in Denver are orange level people. They're workers and they want to go back to work because they want to make money. They want to be able to pay their bills. They want to leave something to their kids, which is all understandable. But they don't question, why are any of us doing what we're doing right now? The yellow level is the middle group, and the middle group is basically the capitalists. The people at the yellow level, the best stereotype for them is maybe the person with a bachelor's degree in business. Most of them do have higher education, typically bachelor's degree. Business is a big one, but it's not the only one. There's scientists who are at that level too. It's very much of an if-then. It's the beginning of science is if-then, although it doesn't work too much in physics anymore, but it does in a lot of other areas. It would work okay in engineering still. But that's your middle third. Your top third is essentially, most of them are people who have graduate degrees in typically humanities, but there are specific things like specific fields like sociology, marriage and family work, psychology, that people are really trained to think in green kind of ways. So what happens when you have these three groups, we've got, in this country, we have culture wars because none of the three groups understand the others. And maybe for good reason, but if you're in the orange group, you think that everybody who doesn't see things the way you are has been indoctrinated by education because they're all more educated than you are, and they just think they're smarter and they know better, but really they're dumb. You just have to go back to the way things always work because that's how things are. If you're at the green level, then you think that people at the orange and yellow levels just aren't educated enough. They just are, they need to wake up, they need to grow up, and they need to get on with things. If you're at the yellow level, you're sort of in the middle, and you, on the one hand, you think the people at the orange level are just hopelessly backwards, and you think the people at the green level are just illogical and they think magically. That just, this is just magic thinking. Everybody knows that things go in a straight line. It's all if then. That's why you have culture wars. To end the culture wars, you have to get at least to the next stage, which is the blue stage. Let me take a sip here. At the blue stage is where we finally start picking up gamma. And gamma is interesting because it integrates and cleans things up, but it cleans things up in sort of reverse order to the way things were laid down. So we start, the blue stage is a gamma beta stage. This is the stage of self-actualization. Well, we all know a little bit about self-actualization. It's about becoming who we're meant to be and become peak experiences and all that. We know kind of what the theory of self-actualization is about. This is the first stage that's inclusive. This is where you can kind of look around and see that, hey, all these people are acting kind of the way that they act because they have developed the way they've developed. And these are all steps, you know, but, and it's not that one's necessarily better than the other. It's not like a 10-year-old's better than a 4-year-old. It's just that a 10-year-old's more developed than a 4-year-old. And so ideally we would find a way to make it easier for adults to continue growing. But, you know, we can kind of accept where people are. This is the first stage where passion really becomes important. At this point, where it's not about preferring our emotions and we just let everything out. We let it all hang out like you do in the green stage. This is about, I can decide whether I want to feel good or bad. I'd rather find the things that make me feel good and make me feel whole and make me feel like I'm contributing, and I'd rather do those things. So this is the first stage where we start to begin to distinguish between feelings and emotions. Oh yeah, we want to listen to the higher self. We don't really want to listen to the ego. But there's still a lot of ego at this stage. Now at this stage, this is the stage where when you see people who tell you that all emotions are driven by thought, most of them are coming from this stage. And remember, this is the gamma beta stage. So they're talking, that what they're doing is they're cleaning up beta driven emotions, which is our reactive emotions. And so, yes, those are all driven by thought. And so it's easy to see that, yeah, this is what they're faced with. So yeah, this makes sense from where they are. This is where we believe in evolution, but we believe in evolution by addition. And so evolution by addition is, if I just add something new, oh, I just added the gamma wave. That's new. That means I'll evolve. Oh, I just added a new meditation technique. And so maybe if I do that, I'll be able to add the ability to stop my thoughts. And if I do that, then I can add enlightenment. Hey, this is all about, it's all about adding. This is the first stage where manifesting becomes an important topic. Now, people at the green stage may try to manifest, People at lower stages than that may try to manifest, but they're going to get hung up because at the green stage, you know, remember, emotions are all important and you let it all hang out. And so it's just all kind of sloppy and you're not differentiating feeling good, feeling bad. It's just you let it all hang out. And so you get what you manifest is just all over the map. At this stage, you're starting to control, you know, you're preferring to feel good. You're finding ways to clean up some of the reactive stuff so that you can feel good more and more of the time. And at this stage, you get the first ideas about manifesting. And the first idea about manifesting is that the universe works for me. All I have to do is decide what I want. And if I go through the program, if I decide what I want and I really feel the way I want to feel when I have it, and I picture it and I do all these things, I let go of my attachment to it, then it will come to me. And we've all kind of heard that stuff. The phrase that really resonates with the blue stage is feel the fear and do it anyway. Now, most people, and I actually heard somebody who was in the blue stage talking about this, and she said, well, most people do this, and she's really talking about people in the green stage, I think. But what she said is, most people only, they hear, feel the fear and do it anyway, and they only do the last 3 words. They do it anyway. At the green stage, you're afraid all the time. You're in this kind of high beta, almost panic mode, very defensive. And so you're so close to overwhelmed. You assume I'm just feeling the fear anyway. I'm already feeling the fear. I'm just going to do it anyway. What you get is something that in psychology we'd call counterphobic behavior, where you're acting against your fear. And what that does is add to your stress level, which adds to your panic. The idea of feel the fear and do it anyway is you actually pay attention to the physiological sensation that you've identified as fear. It's like, oh, where do you feel it? I feel it here in my chest. What does it feel like? What shape is it? How big is it? How heavy is it? Is it moving? What's the texture on the outside of it? What does it feel like it's made of? You start going through all of those distinctions. What does it look like? Does it have a smell? Does it have a color? Is it spinning? You go through every kind of possible question and become friends with that sensation in your body. 9 times out of 10, it changes. It alters. It tells you why it's there. It tells you what it wants you to do. And then once it does that, then you can do it anyway. But you actually have to examine it before you can do it anyway. That leads, once you have done that, once you have gotten rid of a significant chunk of your reactive emotions, then you can move to indigo. And at the indigo level, we've now gone down we've jumped down another notch. We've jumped down from gamma beta to gamma alpha. And we've jumped from self-actualization to self-transcendence. At this stage, we no longer follow the whole evolution by addition. we realize that it's really evolution by subtraction. What we do is we don't evolve by adding new capacities. We evolve by subtracting things from our lives that subtracting old identifications and old attachments that have never served us. This is where inner work really takes on. We start doing a lot of, it's where shadow work, excuse me, shadow work starts taking over. We start looking at the fact that the reason that if we have it in our life, it's because we've manifested it ourselves, and if we've manifested it ourselves, it means that some part of us wants it. Now, it may not be that we consciously say, well, I want to be poor, or I want this virus to be here, or I want a worldwide depression to start. I don't think anybody is consciously kind of going out saying, this is what I want. There's a lot of things that are sort of collective, the collective consciousness kind of that knows it's time for a change and is producing one. This is the stage. The theme of this stage is intuition. This is where our intuitive nature really takes over at the indigo level. This is where we start the work of releasing our attachments to control, security, and approval. There are various ways of doing that. If you don't know of the Sedona method, I would recommend that, if that's something that you're interested in. When we release that, as we releasing our attachment to control, security, and approval, what we're doing is we're releasing a lot of instrumental emotions, which means that we're starting to face a lot of our bypassed emotions finally. But we're doing it from an area of power and strength, and not from the point of view of a 3-year-old who is going to be overwhelmed by them all the time. At the indigo level, our sense of manifestation has changed. It's no longer that the universe works for me. It's now become that I work for the universe. I'm doing things that the universe wants. And when we get to that point, we've now moved to the violet stage. At the violet stage, we downshift again, and now we're working at gamma theta. We're cleaning up. We've cleaned up beta. We've cleaned up alpha. Now we're going to start cleaning up theta. So this is the stage where we're releasing bypassed and foreign emotions. As we're releasing bypassed emotions, the bypassed emotions are that one is, what I can say is, releasing bypassed and foreign emotions is a lot like doing an archaeological dig, at least from what I understand about archaeological digs. I've never been on one, but watching it on TV, this is what I understand. It's like you have to do it very carefully. You do it very slowly and deliberately. But once you get to a spot, you hit something that you realize you have to be careful with, and you very carefully work around it and work it out. But once you've worked it out, you now have a whole. And usually when there's one thing there, there's a lot of other things there. And so once you have a hole there, it's much easier to get the other stuff out because you now know what the depth is, you know where the stuff is, and you can get the stuff out pretty easily. But then now you've got a new flat, but you know that there's older stuff. And so again, you have to work very carefully and deliberately. And the first one is always, the first chunk at a new level is always the hardest one to get out. What happens when you work through bypassed emotions, and like I said, most of it in most people has to do with grief and shame. It can do with other things can be bypassed too. And certainly if you've had a lot of trauma in your past, by definition, trauma is bypassed. It's something that was too big for you to deal with at the time. And so, yes, there's trauma work to be done, but at this level, you can kind of work through a lot of that stuff reasonably quickly. When you get down to the foreign emotions and you think, okay, well, this is where my parents programmed me, there is a layer of that, but that's the most superficial layer. It is sort of the stuff that just came from my parents' craziness. When you get through the layer of your parents' craziness, the next layer down is ancestral and past life stuff. Now, I'm going to say that if you don't believe in ancestral and past life emotions, I understand. I didn't either. I'd read about them. I'd seen people talk about them. When I was doing this work with myself, I actually came upon, I had matching pains. They were on either side of my breastbone. The left one told me that it was scary to be seen. It was afraid of being seen. And the one on the right said it was sad to not be seen. The one on the left identified itself as a past life emotion, and that one was fairly quick to let go of, to just release. The one on the right was much more difficult, and I had to get help to do that. And that turned out to be something that had been in my family for many generations, and it all went back to, I don't know, some guy who didn't get the girl is really what it amounted to. And so, once that was released, then it was gone, and I was able to dig down past that. What I started finding once I got down past that, though, is that you get to the deeper levels are really not about your family. It's not about your past lives. It's not about your ancestors. It's really, I call them evolutionary emotions. And it's the stuff that you feel it, that you decided that this was true, and it's your beliefs that are really kind of sticking to these sensations in your body. And the reason that they're sticking there, the reason that they got there to begin with, is because everybody who's ever been alive has come up with the same basic beliefs at that stage. I'll give you some examples. Nobody cares whether I'm dead or alive. If people ever knew how awful I am, they would hate me. I really don't know anything. I'm just doing this to show off, and people are going to realize that. There's nothing special about me. I hope you recognize that those are universal. we all have those sensations. We all have those beliefs, and the beliefs are tied to specific physical sensations in our body. And the only way to release those beliefs, unlike sort of the idea that, oh, well, we talk about them and we just realize that they're irrational. Yes, they're irrational, but the evidence has all shown, and that's a very good blue level thought, but the reality is that whether it's irrational or not, and especially if it's irrational, you can tell yourself that it's irrational. You know it's irrational. It's not affecting you. The next time you come under serious stress, it's coming back. Whatever you say you believe is going to take a back seat to whatever your body is programmed to believe, because you are holding on to this physical sensation of contraction. So at this point, let me talk a little bit about what feelings are. I mentioned feelings earlier, but when you really get down to it, that whole voice of the higher self thing, what you have is the way we're designed is that we get these senses of expansion and contraction in our body. Specifically, mine are mostly in my chest. Other people say they have theirs other places, but the ones I feel are mostly in my chest. When we're doing something that's good for us or good for the people around us, we get this sense of expansion. We get a feeling of lightness. We get a feeling of warmth. We get a feeling of joy. We get a feeling of aliveness. And that's a sign, do more of that. When we're doing something that's not so good for us or not so good for the people around us, the opposite happens. We get a sense of contraction. And the sense of contraction feels colder. It feels distant. It feels scary. It feels more alone. It doesn't feel pleasant. It hurts. It's a contracting sensation. Sorry. We get this sense of, yeah, that's what a feeling is. What happens with emotions is that we attach to those sensations. We think that those sensations are saying something about us, instead of being guidance, telling us, do this, do more of this, do less of that. It's telling us, oh, you're a good person, or, oh, you're a horrible person. We attach to that being permanent, to that giving us some kind of identity. And the whole point of emotional development is to let go of that. Now, one thing you should have and I keep talking about emotional development. I said spiritual emotion and emotional development in the title of this. Once you get to blue, it's all the same. Spiritual and emotional development are the same thing. Once you get to blue, spiritual development is about removing all the old emotional crap that you have taken on. That is what spiritual development is. So let me get back to talking about this one. In violet manifestation, it's moved from the universe does what I want to, I do what the universe wants. In violet, the universe and I want the same thing. It wants for me what I want for it. This is the stage of feelings. This is the stage where we have removed emotions by and large from our system. We are all the old programmed stuff, we've just removed it. We've released it. But we're still stuck with a sense of a separate self. And I can tell you, this is, I know it well. I call it the scar of separation. I feel it right here in my chest, even as I talk about this. And I had a conversation with it about, maybe a week ago, and asked it why it was so persistent on staying there. Intellectually, I know that there's no separation. But it's still there, and its response to me, which was kind of interesting, was you signed up for this human existence, and part of human existence is dealing with separation, and yeah, you're not going to have to deal with it forever, but I don't want you speeding through this. You need to take your time and slow down and realize what it is that you're giving up before you give it up. So that leads to one last stage, which is ultraviolet, which is gamma delta. Gamma delta is the stage of non-duality. The attitude toward manifesting at that stage is the universe is one. There is no me anymore. It's just the universe is one. And this is what I call, the theme of this is what I call guided instinct. Guided instinct is, remember, with instinct, it's all biological. It's all pre-programmed. It's not conscious. It's biological. You do what everybody else does when they hit that stage. Guided instinct, I picked that word because I haven't ever seen a word for it, because there aren't very many ultraviolet people, and they don't talk about it in this way. I mean, I haven't met with an enlightened yogi master or something to tell me about it. But with guided instinct, what you do, it's, first of all, it's super conscious, but it's also super automatic. And instead of being driven by biology, it's driven by spirit. And so what you do, and instead of being universal, it's very idiosyncratic. It's very unique to you, is really the word I want. And so what it is I do the correct thing at the correct time in the correct situation automatically, without thinking about it, without stopping to consider. I do that by being me. And by being me, I channel the will of the universe. That's what I call guided instinct. So here's where I was going to draw a neat pattern for you, and I can't really do it. So, but I'm gonna have to do this with my fingers. I call it the diamond pattern. And so you think about a diamond goes like this. I hope that's all on screen. And so this is the way I see development. You go like this and you go like this. And so you start, there are different ways to think of it. You start at delta, you go to theta, you go to alpha, you go to beta, you go to high beta, and then gamma beta, gamma alpha, gamma theta, gamma delta. Now, if you think about it in terms of capacity, then you go from instinct to emotion to unquestioned thought to logic to defensiveness to thoughtfulness to intuition to feeling to guided instinct. And so what I've just traced is the growth and overcoming of the ego. And so at this widest part right here, at the green level, that's the level of defensiveness. And so if this is defensiveness, I'll just put my hand there. When I go up past that, I go to gamma beta, which corrects beta. And so I turn logic into thoughtfulness. And then I go up a next step and I go to gamma alpha, which corrects alpha, and it turns unquestioned thought into intuition. And then I go up one more notch and I get to gamma theta, which corrects theta, and I turn emotionality into feeling. And finally, I get to the end. I get to gamma delta, which corrects delta, and it turns instinct into guided instinct. That's the trajectory of development. Okay. So we're about to wrap up. Thank you for everybody who stayed along. I've got just a little bit more to go. I know I'm over time. Thank you for sticking. I have three more last big ideas. You remember the three ideas I started with. It's up to us. Outer manifestation always follows inner transformation, and we each have a role and we need to find it. So here are the three I want to leave you with. Emotional development limits all other development. When I looked at this, the reason I thought about putting this in this spectrum thing is because I realized that it corresponded to some stages in entrepreneurial development. But really, in any form of development, the one that always has to be at the top, you can't develop spiritually before you develop cognitively, for instance, or morally before you develop cognitively. Cognitive is always the front edge, but emotional development is always the brake on cognitive development. The reason that people get stuck at the orange level, the yellow level, the green level, whatever level they get stuck on, some of them get stuck at the red level. The reason they get stuck there is because their emotions are stuck. And what the practical, I've never seen this written anywhere, but just from my own observation, the practical consequence of that is that emotional development, well, cognitive development never is more than a stage ahead of emotional development, never more than one. And so if you want to move from green to blue, then your emotional development has to catch up to at least green, for instance. The next thought I have is that there are three kinds of mismatches. And so, again, thinking about this in terms of, say, entrepreneurial development and emotional development, if we each have something that we're meant to do, it means that there's something that we're here to provide the world. And so I'm thinking that the people that are providing that to the world are the people who are basically entrepreneurs, which is not to say that other people aren't providing it. But if you're a therapist, you're in business for yourself, you're pretty much of an entrepreneur. If you're a teacher and you are doing anything, if you are doing basically anything you're doing, at the very least, you're having to sell yourself. And if we actually have a worldwide economic problem of the scale that people are thinking is pretty likely at this point, a lot more people are going to be out of work, and which means that a lot of people are going to be selling what they know, which means that we have to be thinking in terms of entrepreneurship. If you're looking at it that way, there are three basic kinds of mismatches. Okay. One is that, say, I'm operating emotionally at the blue level, but I'm selling my time for money, like at the orange level. That's a pretty easy one. And there's nothing wrong with selling your time for money. But the thing is that I have the capacity to if I'm at the blue level, I have the capacity to start a business, make promotions, leverage, build a team, build a corporation, sell stock, build more teams within the corporation so that we're selling multiple different things, become an industry giant, a worldwide conglomerate. That's kind of what blue level thinking is. A blue level entrepreneurship is kind of out at that level. Now, if I'm functioning at that level and I'm selling time for money, then it means I don't have to sell time for money. I could move out that way. I don't have to, but I could. If I want to, then that's business coaching. That's mentorship. That's something like that. That's one level. The second kind of mismatch that we've already seen, and I think we're going to see a lot more of, is like, say I've got a yellow level business, which is your normal capitalist business where I'm the sole proprietor, but I'm selling lots of stuff to lots of people, and are running promotions and are doing all this kind of stuff. And say my family member gets really sick and ends up in the ICU, or the government starts having problems because there's unrest over the economy, or people just don't have money to come and spend in my store anymore, and I don't know what to do. I'm having a hard time making payroll and even paying the rent. And now all of a sudden, all of that's weighing on me, and I've got this yellow level business, but all of a sudden I'm functioning at maybe the red level. I'm functioning at survival. I'm functioning at fight or flight. Well, I can tell you what happens at that point. It's like, if I've got a yellow level operation and I'm functioning at the red level, that operation ain't gonna stay in operation for very long. I'm primed to go out of business. That's the second level of mismatch. The third level of mismatch I want to talk about, though, because I don't think it's something that people really understand. And it gets back to my first 3 points, is that sometimes there's a mismatch between where we are and the context we find ourselves in. And at this point, the context is that we have done a lot of stuff at the yellow level and green level that has driven us right to the brink of problems, serious worldwide problems. And if we want to fix some of the problems we have, pollution and how people are treated, and education and healthcare, and all the things that I think thoughtful people all realize that we need to do something about, it means that we're going to have to solve things at a completely different level than the orange level or the yellow level or the green level. We really are going to have to solve things from, I say at a minimum, the indigo level, which means that we've got some work to do. We're going to have to do things from the level of not self-actualization, but self-transcendence. If we don't do things from the level of self-transcendence, we're not going to solve the problem. My third big point is that neither therapy nor coaching can really tell you who you are. And I say this as someone who was trained as a therapist and who has done coaching for years. But neither one of them really can tell you who you are. There's two kinds of coaching. One kind of coaching is the accountability coach. And the accountability coach asks you what you want to do and then holds you accountable for it, tries to get you to do it. Well, think about the 4 types of people that we talked about way at the beginning of this, all that many hours ago. You've got the clueless people. Well, that's not going to help them because they don't know what they want. You've got the self-saboteurs, and trying to hold them accountable to do things when clearly part of them doesn't want to do it. That's not really helping them. You're just kind of forcing them to go off in a direction that part of them is really screaming not to go off in. You've got the obsessive compulsive people who they'll be down with going to get more money or more power or more prestige or whatever, and they will absolutely do it, but they'll still be miserable and they'll make everybody else around them miserable because they're so obsessive compulsive. Or you've got the people who, the determined group, the disciplined group, who kind of go off, they're already going off in the wrong direction. And so you hold them accountable to go off in the wrong direction faster, and they'll do it. And then they're still going to change. And I don't think we're not in a position at this point in history where we can afford people going off in the wrong direction for real long. I mean, that's kind of in good times, in easy times, we have that as a option. In bad times, we really don't have the option to waste time like that. We have to get things right. We have to get things right fairly quickly. You know, not immediately, but fairly quickly. We need to figure out what it is we're doing, and we need to do that. That's one kind of coaching. The second kind of coaching, is mindset coaching, and I would also add in the first kind of therapy, which is CBT. They both kind of go together with that. They're both based on the idea that you are what you think you are, and your emotions are what you think they are. What you think in general, what you believe, and so they take a real superficial view of this, I think. And like I said, I think it works really well at the blue level. It works great at the blue level. But if what we need is indigo, it's not going to get us there. And that leads to the other type of therapy, which is depth therapy. And depth therapy is excellent for telling you who you're not. But it's not good at all at telling you who you are. And speaking just as a human being, there's for any one of us, there's almost infinite number of things that you're not. that I'm not, that the next person is not. But if we take the time to figure out all the things we're not, and say, okay, well, that's not what I am, it's time to try something else, that could take many lifetimes and a lot of expense, and none of us have the time or money for that, or patience. So here's what I want to leave you with. I started out with my search for the big why. And so I want to end with my search for the big why. My big why is that I'm here, I'm alive now for a reason. I'm alive now because I was meant to find out all the stuff that I talked to you about today, that I told you today, because I knew that we were going to get to a time like this where people needed to change. Society needed to change. The world needed to change. And the only way that was going to happen is if we changed it. And so that's why I'm here. The way I do that is that I help people do a couple of different things. I help people figure out who they are, and I help people figure out what's stopping them. And who they are really breaks down into a few questions. It's like, why are you here? What are you here to do? Who are you here to help? How are you here to help them? And what's stopping you really has to do with all of the emotional junk that they've attached to and identified with, and helping them find ways to release that. And so that's what I do. And if that's something that you need help with, reach out to me. I think we all need help with that. But at that point, I am going to end this and unmute everybody and ask if anybody has any questions.
Thank you for that. I have no questions from me. I'm looking forward to the replay that I can go through everything you said and just process it. And I'm sure I'll have lots of questions for you thereafter.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Okay. Doctor, can I ask one question? You talked about reverting back to the previous level, like people coming from the yellow to the red.
Uh-huh.
Does that happen across all kind of level, like people coming from the indigo to, let's say, yellow, or from the violet to green, for example?
People can, it's possible. The thing that's happened right now is, remember, we've got a lot of people who are, there are people who are kind of stuck at green right now, where they're already, they privilege emotions over thinking. And so and they don't understand that a lot of what they think is them is not really them to begin with. And so it's very easy when when somebody like that who is privileging emotions all of a sudden gets stuck in a position where there's a lot of emotional contagion around, there's a lot of blame to go around, there's a lot of that's not me, that's somebody else going around, then all of a sudden you get to this spot where you start adopting that and thinking that's yours. And what that does, once you do that, that automatically shoots you down a level, that shoots you down a few levels, because you're all of a sudden you're taking on stuff that's not yours to begin with, and you're focusing on stuff that's not yours to begin with, or it's not about you. Let's put it that way. You know, I mean, yeah. And so it's like, you can do it in all different ways. It's like, oh, well, there's so many children dying. Oh, the people in Africa. Oh, and all of that's true. And it's important to be open to that and to have compassion for it. And it's also important not to let ourselves get identified with that.
Does this, I'm sorry to just to follow up on this, does this mean that some people might be at two different levels at the same time, but they are like dealing with two different stuff, or they have to move between these levels? So they just discard the first level and go back to the previous level or something?
I think, so when you're talking about levels, it's like all of us have pieces. You know, let's say you're at the blue level, okay? Let's say you're functioning at the blue level, and you're doing pretty well there. You've got little pieces. We all have little traumas in our life. So there's pieces of us that are all functioning at the red level. There's pieces of us that are all functioning at the infrared level. There's pieces of us that are functioning at the radio wave level, because we've got other stuff that we picked up from our parents. I mean, we could be blue in our lives, but we go home and visit the family on holiday or something, and immediately we're picking up the family's junk again, like we always have. And we've got this feeling like, God, I haven't felt this way since I came and visited the folks the last year. And we've got this whole thing going on. And it's, I mean, yeah, you're laughing. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So we've got this stuff. We all have this stuff going on. It's not that we've got a level that we function at in general, but it's, maybe it's 90% of the time. And that's our predominant level, but it doesn't mean that we don't have little pieces of junk scattered along before that as we are developing past green, it gives us a chance to go and clean all that junk up, a little bit at a time, if we decide to. But I want to say, getting past green that's a trick. That's a trick. I remember when that happened to me, I was like 23 years old, I think, 22, 23. And it was intense. It was intense. It was like my defenses, I mean, I just came unspooled for about a week. My defenses were a mess. And I was completely unspooled for a while. And it was like, and I remember talking to a professor about it later, and it's like, that happens to everybody when they're about 25. You just did it earlier. But there's a lot of people that are so defensive, they won't let themselves do that. And you have to, if you're going to go past green.
I'm good. Thank you very much. Share your answers.
Sure. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you, Stephen. That was super powerful.
Okay. Well, thank you. Who am I talking to?
Lainey.
Oh, hey, Lainey. How you doing?
Good.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I am glad you enjoyed it, Lainey. If that is it, then I'm going to stop the recording and I will see y'all later.
Take care.
Bye.